Just like to introduce Jake Holloway, who's our speaker today. And I think Jake is uniquely positioned to talk around stakeholder management, particularly given his varied career to date, which has included sales, marketing, consulting, and particularly project management. Over the last 15 or 20 years or so, Jake has managed a number of different projects, ranging from software development, merger and acquisitions, marketing, and product development, where Jake has worked a number of different roles, including technical support manager, sales manager, head of product development, and IT project management. Currently, Jake is a client director in Exceed, again, moving forward the program management. So I'll hand over to Jake, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ed. I suppose I should first put my cards on the table and explain my enthusiasm for stakeholder management. I think it's a very, very important aspect of project and program management, and one that's slightly underserved by our methods, by our codification of processes and what have you. Indeed, a lot of project management methodologies, for example Prince2, really don't like talking much about stakeholder management because it's difficult. And I think it's critical to good project and program management. For me, good experienced project and program managers are the people who can deal with people and manage them in such a way as to help them achieve program success. And the ones who don't merely turn into a kind of administration function, tick boxing, logging issues and risks and going through the administration and technical side of project and program management. So I'm a big enthusiast for stakeholder management, and I'm not going to apologise for that. So specifically in this seminar, we're going to touch on the fact that in large organisations, large enterprises, it's quite common for the team members not to report to the project and program manager. This matrix of responsibility means complex, a further layer of complexity in terms of dealing with the people around the project and stakeholders. It causes a lot of tensions. It causes tensions between projects and the functions, and between projects and other projects that are essentially competing for the same resource. And it's an important specific area, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk to you about it. The webinar is going to cover, as per the agenda circulated, I'm going to start with some stakeholder management basics to sort of, lay out a basic process, talk about stakeholder mapping, support influence matrix, how to persuade, how to communicate with stakeholders, understanding their priorities, and then I'm going to go into different kinds of matrix organisation, what are the struggles and issues that they cause with stakeholder engagement, what problems do they bring to project management, and how do we handle these problems and understand and relate to the matrix stakeholders, if you like. And then at the end, hope there's a chance for some really good questions, which hopefully I can answer. So I'm going to start with stakeholder basics, and I'm going to talk about essentially a simple process, which really I see as a cycle. And it's important to understand that stakeholder management is a perpetual process. It's not something that you execute once. It's something that you continually work on through the program. And the longer the program is, the more time you'll spend dealing with your stakeholders. And particularly, often the difference between project and program management is that for a program you're dealing with a larger number of more important stakeholders, and possibly a wider diversity of opinions and types of involvement in the program. So it's important to be systematic about it. The basic process that I'm going to outline is cataloguing your stakeholders, making sure you have properly identified them, because, as I'll say later, not everybody does identify all of the right stakeholders and therefore misses out on important opportunities to progress the project. Defining the requirements of the stakeholders, and I'm not talking about their requirements, I'm talking about your requirements as a project and program manager. What do you need from them? And in return, what do you need to give them to get what you need from them? And I'll come back to that theme a little bit later as well. I think the third module, very important, is understanding your stakeholder. What are their opinions? Who do they influence? Who listens to them? How can they help you? then into creating the plan, executing, and progressing it. And it's a basic plan, do, check, act, Deming Stewart cycle, which we're all familiar with, I suspect. But I've tweaked it slightly for stakeholder management. So just to summarize it, and I always write that in the middle of my little 6-step cycle, because it's important to remember that your stakeholders are people, that we're talking about organized human interaction here. We're talking about people who have favorites, people who have opinions, people who might not be logical, people who whose opinions might divert from the organization's opinions, and so on. So it's important to understand that what we're trying to do with stakeholder management is get a little bit more systematic about how we deal with the people around the project and program. So going into a little bit more detail, building the catalog. Obviously, who are stakeholders? And it's very common, I think, particularly in projects, for people to think of the stakeholders as either being the sponsor or maybe the people who are going to be receiving deliverables from the project and program. And often you'll hear project managers talking about, we need to get the stakeholders' requirements and then we need to meet them. Or the stakeholders will be typically, these are the big important people that kicked off the project and program in the first place. I don't agree with this definition at all. So these stakeholders are individuals and groups who can impact on the real and perceived success of the project or program. So it's important to understand the distinction, because obviously a perceived success of a program, sometimes people might not think that's important, but it is, and it is because programs thrive on positivity and they thrive on positive opinion, and dealing with stakeholders is very often about influencing the level to which they are positive about a project and program. So it includes everything, every person and group of people that you need something from, if you like, in order to be successful. So obviously it's project sponsors, but it's also other interested executives around the business. Many a project and program has fallen into difficulty because of executive dissatisfaction, if you like, with the program itself. Project team members are stakeholders. Of course they are. Without project team members and program team members and your suppliers and your contractors, you're not going to have success. So you need to manage them as people as well. You need to understand their needs and make sure that they're getting satisfied. Obviously, your internal and external customers, they could be IT system users, they could be people who are receiving the deliverables, operations staff to whom the process changes might impact, or they could be sales and marketing people. If you're creating a product, the sales and marketing people need to sell that product, and they will need things from the program itself. So whoever they are, they're critical stakeholders. Another group that I talk about are gatekeepers. So these are people who are very often in a quality function or a process ownership function, possibly in an IT organization. They would be IT service management people on the operations side, doing service transition. So and they might not be delivering aspects of the project. They're not really on the team, but they nevertheless control gates and quality checks or process checks that you're going to jump through. And as all of you will know, if you get these people upset, they're not going to help you, and your project is going to sit at a particular point until the next time that they decide to review it. So gatekeepers are critical. And then in a matrix organization, which I'll talk about in specifically a little bit later, the functional managers and the resource owners, the people that are either carrying out work on behalf of the project and program, or they're delivering resources into the program. So we're talking about building a catalog. The catalog should cover all individual groups and subgroups. And by subgroups, I mean if you have a large group, let's say an audience of end users in an IT context, well, actually, they might be split into different geographies, or they might be split into different opinions. There might be some who are comfortable with the change that you're proposing and some who are not. So you might need to address them in different ways, but they have distinct inputs, they have distinct opinions, they have different levels of authority. So it should cover all of those people. And think as widely as possible. As I said earlier, projects can quite easily fail because you haven't really identified all of the stakeholders that you need to address. And the initial information in your catalogue, what is your access to them? Where are they? What communication channels do they use? What do they have access to? Intranets, newsletters, that kind of thing. Who reports to who? What are the key sort of organisational structures involved in your stakeholders? And what levels of authority do they have? It could be mostly professional, obviously, but it could also be personal authority, people with real leadership within an organisation. And you can make an attempt at putting a number on their authority, because that's going to be useful later when you're doing authority mapping. So then you need to, the next step, define your stakeholder requirements. So this is about what you need, what the project and program needs in order to be a success. And for all stakeholders, you will need something. And it's also about understanding what they need in return. Often dealing with people is a negotiated thing, even if it's not formally sitting down across a table, having a structured negotiation. And effectively you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to give you these benefits and you're going to give me in return these requirements or whatever. So it's important to think through your stakeholder catalogue and begin to think, okay, what do I actually need from them? And it could include, obviously, things that are formal project deliverables, like, I need information, I need requirements from them, I need them to sign documents. It could be that you need them to carry out work, or that you need resources from them. It might be with gatekeepers, approval of processes or methods used, a rubber stamp on the quality assessment methodology or whatever. It could be a straightforward approval of deliverables. You also need things like hard work, from your team members, possibly above and beyond the call of duty, or normally in the projects I work with anyway. And executive decisions, sometimes these are complex things to obtain. It could include support, just general. Yes, I'm in favour of these big changes that this program is carrying out, and then you might even want them to promote the project and program in some way, or at least be compliant with it. Agree that it needs to progress, and that's typical with not just with senior stakeholders, but also with people who the project, the benefits of the project might not be that obvious. Your end users, your recipients at the far end of the project who have to live with it, so to speak. And you might require them to change their behaviour, adoption of new practices. And obviously, as we all know, changing people's behaviour is a lot easier to write down on the slide than it is to achieve. And then again, assess how important your stakeholder requirements are. You could give it a scale of 1 to 10. The next phase is probably the slightly most complicated and possibly the most contentious in terms of my way of thinking, and because I bring sales and marketing experience to the project and program management process, I'm often thinking in the terms of influencing people, persuading them, understanding their true opinions, and rather than their documented opinions, which doesn't necessarily mean the same thing. And one of the things about understanding your stakeholders is understanding how they influence you, how they perceive you, you being the project and program, and how they work with each other. So obviously, if you think about influence being an iceberg, with most of it being under the surface, above the surface you have the things that you can see and measure, the organisational relationships, where they sit in the organisation with respect to each other, who reports to who. They might have shared interests, they might have proximity, they might have shared objectives, they may have worked together in the past, and so on, responsibility matrix, etc. So these things are all relatively straightforward to achieve, and they help you build up a picture of your stakeholders and what they like, what they want to see, how they professionally behave. Underneath the iceberg, it's a bit more complicated. because organisations are social social constructs. There are relationships in organisations. People like other people. People dislike other people. People have had problems with each other in the past. There are rivalries. There are alternative routes to achieving a particular end. In a product organisation, you can have multiple product development processes ongoing. Only one is really going to make it to market. These projects are in competition with each other. And there are friendships and what have you. Also, things like language and culture, can heavily impact the way stakeholders feel about each other and about you in the project and program. So it's important to understand to what extent your stakeholders think about the project and program, and to what extent they can influence it. Obviously, why do you worry about this? Because the more positive the stakeholders, the easier the project and program are. And yes, there is technical complexity in projects and programs, but the thing that is the most difficult sometimes to cope with is stakeholder complexity and stakeholder difficult behaviour from stakeholders, which is the subject of the book that I've written. In a crisis, positive opinions, all projects, well, this is maybe slightly personal, but all projects either seem to be impossible or easy, and they flip-flop between those two positions as you go through. And when they're impossible, very often it's the people around the project, the team, the stakeholders, the executives, and what have you, that are making it feel that way. Negative stakeholders really can finish off a project, and it can spiral down into being a death march. So it's incredibly important to maintain the positive opinion about a project. So in your understanding, what do you need to document what you know about their attitude towards, first of all, the project program generally, what they've considered the benefits to them to be, not what they've been told they're going to be, but what do they think they're going to be, and also what they consider, what is their feeling towards the requirements that you need of them. You want them to write documents, you want them to sign things off, you want them to change their behaviour. Well, how do they feel about that? Will it mean a lot of work? Is that work being factored into their workload? Is there a lot of change? Will that be scary? What are their other priorities? How many other project managers are going to them with sets of requirements to sign off and what have you? Is this project a complete distraction? It might be. It's very important for in terms of stakeholder management, to understand really where they're coming from. And also, what is their attitude towards you personally? In a small organisation, it's very common. You will know the project manager, you will know the program manager. You might be positive towards that individual, or you might not be. If you're a key stakeholder, you can just by not being an enthusiast, you can cause a project to miss deadlines quite easily. So it's important for you to have an honest assessment about what you think that person considers towards the key people in the project. And again, assess their support on a scale of 1 to 10. Give it a number, and you can use that later. I'll show you how to use that to prioritise your activity towards the stakeholders. Obviously, early on in a project, you might not know everything you need to know. And part of your stakeholder plan is going to be to find out the things that you don't know. So support versus influence matrix. Now this is not uncommon nowadays in projects and program management, so people start talking about this. Influence in this case, I've put a calculation on it, which is that it's the importance of the requirements from that stakeholder multiplied by the authority that stakeholder has. So that gives them a really, a good measure of how influential are they over, not within the organisation, but how influential are they over the project and program success. And your support can be high and low. And you can plot the stakeholders and groups of stakeholders on your matrix. And this obviously allows you to begin to think about, are they in a, are they in very influential and very low support, in which case they're definitely in the red section. Or are they, for example, a high support, someone with high influence, going to make a big difference to the project and program, and they're very positive about the program. They're excellent. They're the easy stakeholders to have, and I wish they were all like that. Unfortunately, they're not. And so part of your stakeholder management activity is to begin to think, well, how can I move these, move people more out of green and amber, and red and amber, and into green. So obviously, you know, if you have a particularly high authority negative stakeholder or group, you want to move them as quickly as possible so that they have less influence over the project, that they're less important, and ideally you'll also improve the level of support towards the project. And it might be that the easiest route is to either change their mind about the positive, about their levels of support, or to try and find ways of making them less important to the project, which could involve a number of different strategies I'll talk about a bit later. For those in the sort of low support, low influence sector, well, those are the people you really need to work on. They're probably in the sort of bread and butter, if you like, of stakeholder management, but those are people that you need to change their mind. They might be the end users, they might be gatekeepers who are not particularly supportive. They're not necessarily negative, but a little bit more support from them is going to make a big difference. You're not going to make them more important, but so you need to move them into that section. And then if they are highly supportive, but not particularly influential, well, is there a way for you to actually increase the level of influence they have over the project? And this is quite common. You know, we seek out our champions in stakeholder groups and promote them, and that's really what this activity is about, trying to make people more influential, share their positivity towards the project and program. So, step 4, creating a plan. Stakeholder plan is a plan to achieve and obtain the stakeholder requirements that I've talked about earlier, and also to achieve other stakeholder-related objectives, for example, using them to influence each other in a positive way. It describes all of the organised interaction with them. And it's more than a plan to communicate and engage with stakeholders. You hear this term a lot, I need to engage with stakeholders, I need to communicate to them. And I think we have to move beyond that and think, well, actually, we need to understand them, we really need to persuade them, we need to get them on our side, and we need to change their behaviour. And a lot of this obviously is covered in the area of change management, but I don't know of a project and program project and program that isn't doing change management at some level. So I think that project and program managers should have this in their toolkit within their organisation. So why is this? You know, why do we need to persuade them? A simple example: an important executive is essentially, for whatever reason, is inclined against the program, then you need to have a plan to persuade them to change their mind, or at least cope with the fact that there is a dissenting voice in your stakeholder, in your reviews, in your gatekeeper meetings, or what have you. And you just have to face up to it. It's the reality of dealing with being a project and program manager in this particular case. Or if you need the QA department, for example, to carry out some testing or quality assessment or audit, and you want them to do it quickly, and you want them to do it when you want it to be done. Otherwise, your schedule is going to slip because possibly you haven't built quite enough slack into your schedule. And you have to know that they're overloaded with other requests for work, and this is a typical matrix management problem. Well, you need to get ahead of the queue. You need your project to succeed. That's your job. So you need to make sure that they are more positively aligned towards supporting your project. This requires persuasion. This is why understanding and persuasion is a big part of stakeholder management. It's about reality. It's dealing with the reality of the situation rather than the textbook, if you like, of project and program management. Because if you look at a textbook about project and program management, very often the stakeholders are universally supportive. You just have to ask them for deliverables and they'll sign them off, they'll write them, they'll attend interviews, they'll come to your meetings, they'll read this project newsletter. But the reality is it's not like that. So project and program management, a little bit, it's not just about Gantt charts and risk logs, it's also about a bit of social psychology, a bit of persuasion, a little bit of selling as well. So how to persuade, you know, what goes into your plan? And I'm not going to be able to get into this in great detail, because we don't have time, and maybe it's an interesting subject for another seminar one day. So I think there are two approaches. When you're talking about stakeholder groups, so big groups of users, large teams, large operations departments, that kind of thing, then you need to think about the profession of advertising. Advertising is organised changing of opinion, organised changing of people's perceptions, and they have codified methods. It's a science. It's not an art. And I think there's no reason why project and program management shouldn't adopt some of the strategies and techniques of advertising. So you design your messages to address their feelings, to address their fears, not just information requests and rather cold, documentation and what have you. But actually, okay, you want this bunch of users to adopt new practices, to move across to this new organisation, to relocate, to whatever. Well then, what are their fears, and how do you address those fears? And it's important to use their channels to connect. I say kind of jokingly, no more project newsletters, but one of the worst things that project and program managers do is try and invent new ways of communicating with people that didn't exist before. It's very important to reach people through the media that they already use. It could be their intranet, it could be their regular meeting, their town hall type meetings, or their structure of hierarchical meetings. They might have a formal process of disseminating information through a series of meetings or whatever. It's important to fit in with how they consume information and how they get their information from the organisation, rather than trying to invent your own easily ignored, kind of slightly to one side things like project newsletters, like T-shirts and what have you. And if you want to go further, you want to become more organised about this, well, measure the reach, measure their opinion, carry out surveys about how they feel about certain things, measure their level of recall, the amount they're engaging with things. You can quite easily have information on a website or an intranet, and you can measure how often people visit it, who's read it, how often it gets read, how completely, how long they spend on the site. And there are all these techniques available to people who are advertising professionals. Obviously, we're not. We are project and program managers, but we can begin to move down the road to, in a little way, becoming a bit more marketing oriented. And I think satisfaction, what is their satisfaction with what you are doing, is very important. Easily put into a survey, easily done a little questionnaire with a free lunch or what have you to incentivize them. In a way, ask yourself, what would a marketing person do in this circumstance? And if you don't know, get a marketing person in your project. That's what project and program communications professionals are for. And I'm a big advocate for any project of any size, a decent size, having someone that thinks about things from this perspective to advise the project and program manager on how to reach out to groups. Maybe slightly more difficult for us who don't come from a negotiating and sales background is when it comes to dealing with individual important stakeholders, senior managers, key gatekeepers, the matrix functional owners that I'll talk about in a minute. And there you have to think like another profession whose job it is essentially is to help people change their mind, is to encourage people to see things in different ways. And those are salespeople. So what is the sales process? It definitely focuses on persuasion, on changing behaviour, changing perception. It's not just about talking to them, engaging with them. Yes, I had a 2-hour meeting with so-and-so, but that doesn't achieve anything. It's only when they've come out with a different opinion that you've really achieved a positive change. Use sales techniques, for example, to manage their decision-making process. What do they want? What do they really want individually? What are their objectives? What are their personal objections to everything that you're talking about? Obviously, they might well be very, very positive, but you still need to understand why they're positive. What is it that this project and program is doing for this individual stakeholder? What benefits do they get out of it? And And then if they are negative, what is the decision-making process? If you're asking them for a big approval or a release of budget or whatever, well, how are they going to make that decision? Ask them, find out who's involved, who's influencing them, who are the key decision makers. Can you influence the process? Can you make sure that you deliver information into that process at the right time? What benefits are they looking for? Can you make sure you tick those boxes? And close them on important decisions. Ask for the approval, ask for the budget, ask for the the positivity, if you like. And by the way, like I said, I don't have time to go into the sales and marketing aspect of this, but there are plenty of great resources around about how sales and marketing operates on the internet, and I would urge you to have a look and open your mind, if you like, to using the skills that these guys use on a daily basis in your job. You can also look at persuasion techniques. There's some great books around about how people make decisions, how they can be persuaded. And again, when you're sitting in front of people, what are the kind of techniques that you can use to help them be positive towards a particular decision? Things like social proof, like scarcity, investment rationalization and comparisons. These are all techniques that you can look up if you just Google for persuasion science or what have you. So going back to the stakeholder map, if you then begin to think, okay, well, what are my objectives for this stakeholder? And as you you obviously have to have realistic objectives. You can't turn someone who is completely against something into completely for it, and nor would that be particularly easy to do or possible. But you certainly want to move them in a particular direction. You might want them to be more influential, use them better, or what have you. And you can start to map this on your support influence matrix. And if you look at stakeholder E, for example, this is an example. Imagine this is a group of end users or customers, if you like, and in fact, it might be beneficial for you to think about them as two distinct audiences. One that is very positive, and one that is more neutral. And you can make the positives one more influential, give them more publicity, give them a voice within the program or amongst the users, whoever the community is, the stakeholders, and essentially use them as champions, as I sort of suggested earlier. And then you can model on your influence chart, well, what stakeholders are listening to each other, who has authority, who has influence, who is critical, and for example, at the top of the organization, at the top of the chart, stakeholder F, can you use them to influence stakeholder C, who's quite negative, and find a way to maybe make their opinion less important within the program. So you consolidate your understanding of the stakeholders, their requirements, your objectives for them, and then start to fill out a plan. Okay, how are you going to achieve these results? How are you going to communicate with them? When are you going to have opportunities to persuade them? When are you going to have opportunities to obviously get your technical requirements from them? And how are you going to make that easy for them? If someone is reluctant to, as very often is, to sign off requirements or give you information that is essential to you, well, okay, how am I going to make that easy to them? How am I going to make that easy for them to complete and get back to me? So last, obviously, but not least, prioritize and execute your plan. And obviously, you're thinking, oh, this bloke talks an awful lot about stakeholder management. I've got a job as a project manager program manager to complete, and there's not going to be any time. And you're right. Working with stakeholders can take up all of your time and more. It can become a 24/7 thing, and that's why you have to prioritize. You cannot possibly do all of the things that you would want to do in terms of influencing stakeholders, getting requirements from them, whatever the deliverables are, because it's never ending. So you have to prioritize. Work on the people and the stakeholder groups that are most important to success of the project and program, and be disciplined about that process. If there's a stakeholder that you've been told to go and engage with, but you don't think they're important, don't engage with them. I'll give you my permission. And measure your progress. Are you achieving the objectives? Is stakeholder contributions to the project giving you a schedule problem or a quality problem? If so, you need to escalate that. You need to take action. You need to change your plan. You need to escalate the situation. You need to take action. Stakeholder problems are sometimes some of the most difficult to deal with, and the earlier and the more quickly and the more decisively you deal with them, the better. Okay, so that's a little sort of background on a basic stakeholder management process, and I'm now going to talk about matrix organizations, which is the other aspect of the webinar. So first of all, let me talk about matrix organizations and types of matrix. There's nothing incredibly complicated or clever about a matrix organization. Essentially, we're talking about a situation where you have a set of functions and there are multiple projects that work with those functions. The function could be, departments and groups within the organization. In a coordination project, it's the job of the project manager to move work between the functions. And so it is quite common in very large enterprise IT organizations, where you've got tens of thousands of individuals organized in lots of functional groups around a particular application or what have you. And I apologize for the non-IT people. I do tend to fall back on IT as a set of examples. And the job of the project manager is to move it from function to function, to provide the project envelope within which the work is moved around the organizations. And there are a lot more people doing this than they care to admit, I think, in large organizations. The other type of matrix is obviously where those functions second or loan the resources to the project manager. So the project manager then has ownership of that resource on a temporary basis. And this is more typical in civil engineering, construction, and those kind of organizations where it's easy, and in fact it's desirable for project resources to be entirely associated with one particular program. Coordination projects happen very often in situations where there are people with specialist subject matter knowledge that they can't easily be assigned permanently to one project at a time, and they simply have to multitask, and that's a very common situation with knowledge working and what have you, pharmaceuticals as well as IT, for example. So there are two basic types of projects, and I'm really talking about coordination projects and coordination matrices. There are plenty of situations I've seen where you've got some of your projects are sort of permanent, if you like, in the project and assigned full time, and others, other bits of the work are going to be moved to functions and go to quality teams or subject matter experts or what have you, and that's a sort of a hybrid. Coordination matrices come in two flavors really, or a spectrum of flavors. A weak coordination matrix is where the functions really have the upper hand. They're calling the shots, and the project manager has very little authority. At best, they're trying to sort of coordinate work and pass it from function to function. In a strong coordination project, the project manager has a lot more authority, and the customer-supplier relationship is a lot more defined, with the project manager or the program manager being the customer and the functions being the suppliers, and pretty much the project and program manager can call the shots on when the work's going to get done, to what level of quality, etc. So what are the considerations for stakeholder management in a matrix? Well, obviously, first and foremost, the functional managers and resource owners are key stakeholders. They're people to which you need to go through your stakeholder management process. They're included in the catalogue. You need to understand what they want from you, which are typically work requests and justifications for carrying out the work. And you need to understand what their challenges are, which is a big part of managing projects in a stakeholder organisation. But you have to understand that your project is not their top priority. They might be dealing with other projects. It could be hundreds of other projects in some organisational configurations, and you are one of many and you're not special in that respect. So that's a very important consideration which you do have to deal with. Because, you know, the other consideration is that as project and program managers, we like to be in control of our destiny. We like to achieve the project objectives, the program vision, and that's the whole idea of a project and program, isn't it? But very often in a matrix, your success is dependent on other people, on other managers with other priorities, and by implication, by the impact of other projects on those functional managers. So you have to really understand what they want from you. You have to understand their workload and how they want work passed to them, what their entry and exit criteria are for carrying out these tasks on behalf of your project. And consider if you're in a weak coordination situation where effectively, you know, you are one of many project managers scheduling work and you really don't have much in the way of authority, well, you have to persuade them to work with you. You have to speak up on behalf of your project in order to get their attention, in order to get them to carry out the activities that you want them to. So from your perspective, each functional team requires managing. The more there are, the more relationships you're going to have to deal with. And they're not going to coordinate things between themselves. You know, if one says, okay, I can do this work, it's going to take 2 months from July to September, and the other one says, well, I can't start in September, I can't start until November. You know, they're not going to sort this out for you. That's your job. Project portfolio management, where you've got if you like, a function or a system, trying to get the optimal fit of all the functions and all the projects. It should help in the situation, but it's such a multivariate problem. It's very, very hard to crack, and very often it is not as helpful as the software vendors would like you to think it is. So what happens is you tend to find that functional managers are busy. They're not necessarily responsive. They're controlling the timescales, not you, but you'll still be held accountable for the project. They'll make promises about when they can carry out work or give you resources, but they'll, you know, something will change and they'll break those commitments. It could be right at the last minute. And they control quality. They're controlling, they're, you know, carrying out the execution of key deliverables on the behalf of the project and program. So it's, you know, that aspect of the control that you would expect to have as a project manager is not with you. They can also sometimes control cost in some organizations. All of the time they will spend on the project and program will get billed to you regardless of whether or not you think that's good value for money or what have you, and it comes out of your budget. They also sometimes work in different ways, you know, how they manage their demand process. So they might have different work request forms, they might have different resource request forms, etc. There might not be an organization standard, and that makes things complicated because you're dealing with different people in different ways. Some people might not have a formal process and want to, you know, have a phone call or a chat or a face-to-face, and others might have a lot of bureaucracy around the process. And they're human, they have favorites, they have opinions about what project's important, and they have their own set of objectives given to them by their own management structures, which are going to conflict with yours. And then think about the other perspective, think about their perspective. And it's very, very important. It's one of the key messages I have about stakeholder management is to always think about the other people. Always think about them. What do they want, and what their opinions are, and what are their challenges. So if you're a functional manager, you're sitting there and you've got a lot of different project managers who are not coordinating with each other, who are not making your life easy, and they're coming at you with random work requests. They seem to keep changing their schedules. They seem to keep changing their requirements. They don't want to document things, and they change them at the last minute. Imagine how frustrating that could be. They don't seem to, you know, these project managers, they don't seem to understand your priorities, your problems, the difficulty of getting resources, the difficulty of getting individual engineers, for example, to do things that are boring, things they don't want to do, doing the same thing again and again and again. And good stakeholder management means that we should be, you know, we as project and program managers thinking about everybody, all of the stakeholders, including people who don't report to us. So you're sitting there as a functional manager, and and you've got a lot of different requests coming in. You're very busy. You could easily be well overloaded. You might not have enough staff. You might be losing staff. You might be not recruiting staff, and what have you. So from their perspective, it's a complex situation as well. As I said, good stakeholder management is understanding your stakeholders' perspectives, or their opinions, their pressures, and helping them to understand yours. So the more you understand the real pressures on them and change their mind about the priority of your project, the more likely it is that they will understand the pressures on you. There are other perspectives in matrix organizations as well. So for example, the team members in the functions, they've got two managers very often at the same time who have different sets of objectives and pulling them in different directions. And we'll all be, if we've worked in matrix organizations, you'll all be familiar with this situation. And that makes their life a little bit difficult. The organization perspective is also that the organization as a whole is not necessarily optimizing resources and functions and projects at the most effective. And this can be a significant problem, which always becomes your problem because you're a project manager and we're required to deliver. So in terms of handling matrix issues, how do you go about it? First of all, understand their work request and demand management process. Make sure you have absolute clarity about what they need in order to get working on your project and program. Be the best project manager at doing that, because that will get you ahead of the queue. If you have uncertainty, negotiate the conditions under which they will carry out the work, the level of quality of the work, the state of the returned deliverables, if that's how this particular project operates. Explain your issues to them, your dependencies, so that they know that if you're changing your mind, you're changing your schedule, that you have good reason for it. The more visibility they have about your world, the easier they'll find it is to understand it. Understand their workload, how much work is coming through their department at the moment, which specific projects are in competition with you. Is there something you can do in terms of coordinating with the other project and program manager to make the life easier for the function so that everybody can win? Understand the real issues and what motivates them, and use this to sell to them, persuade them. So just quick summary, what's the impact of matrix management on the stakeholder management process? Include the functional managers in your catalogue and other project and program managers if necessary. Clarify and document what you need from them and how you are going to get it. Be the best at satisfying their need for instructions, work requests, whatever it is. Understand their pressures, understand the workload, the capacity stress on that organisation. How can you make their role easier? How can you help optimise the matrix? Link your plan with the timing for requests for resources so that they have visibility, and as soon as your plan changes, they can see how that's going to work. It might not be easy to do, but it is incredibly important so that they have visibility down the line of when and how they're going to have to satisfy your work requests. Prioritize what you need from them, so you're not giving them an unprioritized list of requests. Tell them what's most important to you, and understand what is most important to them so that you can prioritize based on their capacity issues, their individual issues, their team member issues, etc. Hold them to account for what they've committed to do. And if it's not happening, negotiate or escalate. Use your stakeholder matrix, use your influence matrix to make sure that you are getting what you need, because being a project manager, being a program manager is about getting what the project and program needs in order to succeed. And stakeholder management is no different. And always remember, we're talking about humans here. We're talking about real people, and treat them with honesty and dignity and respect, and that will pay back in consideration.
Is it more important or less important to keep negative stakeholders on your side?
It depends on how much authority and influence they have, and you have to make it, and that's the judgment call you have to make. If they're powerful individuals, in my book I call them anti-sponsors. These powerful individuals that, and it does happen, I know we don't like to think about it, but they are against the project. And is it more important to keep them on your side? It's very important to persuade them to be on your side. Or if you can't, then you need to manage their influence within the organisation. You have to, marginalise them, for want of a better word. So I think they require a lot of attention, and maybe that's. I think maybe the answer is yes. You keep close to them.
You talked about scoring each stakeholder, assessing how important their requirements and their influence are. How do you use these scores when mapping each stakeholder?
I should have put some numbers on my scale. Simply, in a classic kind of Boston matrix model, the numbers go up the left and along the bottom, and it helps you map them onto the stakeholder influence matrix. If anyone wants to contact me, I'll send you an example where I've got numbers on it, and it might help. But yeah, it's essentially you're plotting the numbers on the grid.
Are there any methods you can suggest to measure the reach, opinion, and the recall when engaging stakeholders?
Well, there are lots. Advertising is all about what they call attribution in marketing. In other words, trying to find out what made the difference to a consumer's opinion or a business user's opinion. So in terms of reach, how many times, you could send out an email, and if you use an email marketing platform like Dotmailer or Constant Contact or iContact, then you can measure a number of times, who opens it, how long they read it for, that kind of thing. If you have a website, you can use analytics software to find out how many people are visiting it, who's individually visiting it, how long are they spending on each page, that kind of thing. Or you can incentivize something like with a newsletter. Get people to fill in a little survey form and type in a response in order for a chance to win a particular prize, like we've done with my book and the survey, for example. And it's about incentivizing response and incentivizing the identification. So that helps you understand reach. Recall, again, surveys, random questionnaires, specifically asking them, are you aware of Project X, Y, Z? Do you know that it's, of these 5 things, what is its top priority? And then again, that helps you measure recall engagement.
How best to influence influential stakeholders based in a geographically diverse or remote location?
Well, on the phone is my sort of, if you're selling to people overseas, it's no good sending them emails. It's no good sending them documentation and things like that. You need to get in their face. And that means, for me, it's still the old-fashioned phone. Find out their phone number and talk to them. And obviously, you then have to understand them. What are the, what drives them? What are their objectives? What are they really trying to achieve? What do they want? And key into that information so that you can effectively position what you're doing as being helpful towards them meeting their objectives. And I think the telephone, and I know it's scary, but we've got to do it.